I had pulled over for a break at the Goulburn South Rest area while driving the Hume Highway from Sydney to Melbourne. It was late, the sky was pitch black, and there wasn't a single truck or car around. The place was eerily quiet, with no streetlights, just the faint hum of cicadas in the summer heat, a constant, high-pitched soundtrack to the oppressive stillness. The air hung heavy, thick with the humidity of a summer night that refused to cool. I'd been on the road for hours, the endless ribbon of asphalt blurring under the headlights, and the relentless drone of the engine had started to wear on me. I needed a break, a chance to stretch my legs and hopefully catch a few hours of sleep before tackling the remainder of the journey to Melbourne. I turned off my headlights, switched off the truck's engine, a satisfying shudder that broke the monotonous hum. Locking both doors from the inside, I drew the heavy curtains, shielding the cabin from the outside world. Climbing into the narrow bunk, I placed my phone above me in the compartment, and set my alarm for the morning, a faint chirp in the otherwise silent cabin. But sleep wouldn't come. It was one of those stifling nights when the air feels heavy, the temperature refusing to dip below 30 degrees. I lay there tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, trying to mentally plan out the next day's route, the delivery schedule, the usual routine that kept me ticking along the highway. My mind, however, was racing. The silence, amplified by the heat, felt suffocating. Every creak of the truck, every distant chirp of a cicada, sent a shiver down my spine. Then it happened. The passenger side door clicked. A soft, metallic sound that sliced through the silence like a knife. It swung open slightly, just enough to turn on the cabin light, flooding the space with an unnatural, cold glow. "What the hell?" I breathed, my voice hoarse in the sudden quiet. My truck was a late model B-double in perfect condition, a pride and joy, meticulously maintained. There was no way the door could have been faulty, no logical explanation for it opening on its own. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the tightening rod I kept by the bed, a simple piece of metal that had felt reassuring in the past, but suddenly felt inadequate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. I waited, every muscle tense, every sense heightened. I expected someone, or something, to climb into the cabin, to fill the space with a presence, a sound, anything to break the tension. I imagined a figure silhouetted against the darkness, a shadowy hand reaching out. But no one came. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing but the thick, oppressive silence that had become the hallmark of this unsettling night. The cabin light remained on, illuminating the empty space beside me, a silent, accusing presence. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. My body felt sluggish, my mind a jumble of fear and confusion. Grabbing my torch from under the bunk, a reassuring weight in my hand, I unlocked my door and jumped down. My boots hit the gravel with a sharp crunch, a sound shocking in its suddenness. I walked the perimeter of my truck, the beam of the torch cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the empty expanse of the rest area. I half expected to find a hitchhiker, a lost soul seeking shelter, or some animal, a possum or a rabbit, drawn to the artificial light. But there was no one, no cars, no signs of life at all. It was just me and my truck in the middle of nowhere, a solitary island in a sea of darkness. A shiver ran down my spine, a physical manifestation of the unease that had settled in my gut. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The silence seemed to press in on me, amplifying the fear that clawed at my throat. I climbed back in, hurriedly double-checked the locks, the metal latch clicking shut with a finality that offered little comfort. I forced myself to lie down again, my body rigid, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a restless vigilance. I tossed and turned, every sound a potential threat, every shadow a lurking figure. The first rays of dawn were a welcome sight, a promise of a new day, a chance to escape the lingering fear of the night. I yawned, stretched, the stiffness of my body a testament to the sleepless hours. Pulling back the curtains, I was greeted by the soft light of the rising sun, bathing the landscape in a golden hue. That's when I saw it. Not 20 meters from where I'd parked was St. Saviour's Cemetery, its crooked headstones casting long shadows in the golden light, a stark contrast to the vibrant green of the surrounding landscape. The sight struck me like a physical blow, a sudden, chilling realization. My stomach turned, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. I felt a cold sweat run down my back despite the morning heat, a stark contrast to the warmth of the sunlight. The unease of the night had solidified into something tangible, something terrifying. I didn't even bother putting my shoes on, just grabbed my keys, started the engine, a roar that broke the eerie quiet of the morning, and drove out of there as fast as I could. My foot pressed hard on the accelerator, a desperate need to escape the place, to put distance between myself and the chilling sight of the cemetery, and the unnerving memory of the door opening in the dead of night. The rest of the drive to Melbourne was a blur, my mind replaying the events of the previous night, the unsettling silence, the inexplicable opening of the door, the stark discovery of the cemetery. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but nothing seemed to fit. Even now, years later, every time I pass that spot on the highway, I feel a chill. The memory of the night, the unsettling silence, the inexplicable event, and the sight of the cemetery are etched into my memory, a persistent reminder of the inexplicable. I don't stop there anymore. The Goulburn South Rest area, once a welcome respite on my long journeys, is now a place I avoid, a place that holds a chilling secret, a place where the boundaries between the living and the otherworldly seem to blur in the dark. The incident has left an indelible mark on me, a lingering sense of unease that lingers every time I drive through the long, dark stretches of the Hume Highway. It's a reminder that some things are better left unexplained, some places best avoided, and that even in the familiar landscape of a truck driver's life, the darkness can hold secrets that we're not meant to uncover. My boyfriend, Ben, is a truck driver who routinely does midnight runs. Oddly enough, I asked him this question myself a few days ago. Have you ever had any weird experiences on the road? He chuckled, a sound that usually held a hint of weary amusement, and said, Nah, not really. Just the usual monotony and the occasional grumpy dispatcher. But then, a few days later, he recounted a story that sent chills down my spine and left him with a lingering unease. It was one of those nights, a pitch-black expanse swallowed by the inky sky, where the highway stretched out like an endless ribbon of asphalt. Ben was nearing the end of his run, tired and ready to park for the night. He spotted a truck stop, or what he thought was a truck stop, nestled beside the road. The lot was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual hum of activity. No lights, no other trucks, no cars, just the unsettling stillness of the night. I figured, screw it, I'm exhausted, he told me, his voice laced with a tremor I hadn't heard before. I just wanted to get some sleep. He settled into his sleeper cab, the familiar comfort of his mobile home wrapping around him. He drifted off, lulled by the gentle rumble of the engine. The next thing he knew, he was jolted awake by the piercing blare of a siren. He looked out the window, his heart leaping into his throat. 3 highway patrol vehicles were parked behind him, their flashing lights illuminating the pre-dawn gloom. Confusion washed over him. He was parked on the side of the road, about 15 miles away from the truck stop where he recalled parking. The engine was off, the truck was locked, and he had no memory of driving. He had been asleep the entire time. The officers approached, their faces etched with a mixture of suspicion and concern. Sir, we received a report of a suspicious individual fleeing from your truck, one of them said, his voice clipped and authoritative. We saw a man in a black jumpsuit running into the field over there. Ben's mind struggled to process the information. He had been asleep in his truck. There was no way anyone could have been inside. He explained this to the officers, emphasizing that his doors were locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. But they remained skeptical, pointing to the supposed sighting and the fact that he'd been found miles away from where he'd parked. Someone must have tried to steal your truck, one of the officers concluded, and got away before we could catch them. Ben found himself agreeing with them, even though it felt surreal. But despite their explanation, a nagging feeling of unease gnawed at him. It didn't quite fit. His truck was meticulously locked, and there were no visible signs of a struggle. It was as if his truck had teleported, a bizarre and inexplicable event. The officers, after running a thorough check of the truck and finding no evidence of forced entry, allowed him to go. He spent the rest of the morning in a daze, replaying the events of the last few hours, trying to make sense of the impossible. He called his dispatcher, reported the incident, and of course told me. My reaction was immediate. "That's terrifying!" I exclaimed, my voice laced with concern and a touch of fear. "Did you tell them about the lack of signs of a break-in?" "Yeah," he said, his voice strained. "But they just said it must have been a quick job, that the guy was probably panicked and didn't have much time." The days that followed were a blur of unsettling thoughts. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Despite the police's explanation, the lack of any real evidence of a break-in left him with a lingering unease. He started noticing strange things. The GPS on his phone would randomly lose signal. He'd find objects in his truck that he didn't remember putting there. The radio would occasionally switch to a static-filled channel. I tried to reassure him, to dismiss it as stress and fatigue. But I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease myself. Ben, usually a man of logic and reason, was beginning to question his own sanity. He started researching similar incidents, stories of truck drivers who found themselves inexplicably lost or displaced without any recollection of how they got there. He found a few forums dedicated to truckers, and the stories were eerily similar. Drivers waking up miles away from where they'd parked, no signs of break-in, and no memory of driving. There were even a few instances where drivers recounted seeing shadowy figures or experiencing strange anomalies alongside the highway. Some of the truckers on the forum theorized it could be some sort of sleepwalking incident, although that didn't explain the police report of someone running away. Others mentioned sleep paralysis or even supernatural phenomena. It got into more speculative topics like sleep paralysis demons or even paranormal activity. Ben wasn't a believer in the supernatural, but the sheer strangeness of his experience and the similar stories he was finding started to chip away at his skeptical facade. We talked about it constantly. I tried to be level-headed, to urge him to focus on the logical explanations. But there were times, during the quiet hours, when I found myself wondering if there might be something more to it. One evening, while he was home for a few days between runs, we were watching a documentary about sleep disorders. Ben paused the program and looked at me with a newfound intensity. "What if it wasn't someone stealing the truck?" "What do you mean?" What if it was something else entirely? Something outside of our understanding?" His voice was almost a whisper, but it was filled with a raw fear I'd never seen in him before. The fear wasn't just for the truck or the strange event anymore, but for his sanity and his safety. He started bringing a small knife with him when he went out for his runs, just in case. The incident, even with a seemingly logical explanation, had shaken Ben's sense of security. He was more cautious, more attentive, more aware of the hidden dangers and the unseen world that lurked beyond the familiar landscape of the highway. He continued to drive, but the experience had changed him. The road, once a familiar friend, now held a hint of the unknown, a whisper of something beyond his grasp. He was still the same kind, gentle man I loved, but there was a new depth in his eyes, a quiet vigilance that was a constant reminder of that night when he lost himself, and regained himself in a surreal and unsettling way. He never had another incident like that, thankfully, but the experience stayed with him. He still tells the story, sometimes with a faint chuckle, other times with a lingering unease. And I, for one, continued to listen, a strange mixture of fascination and fear swirling within me. For in Ben's story, I glimpsed a terrifying truth that sometimes, the strangest things happen on the road, and the most inexplicable events can leave the deepest scars, even on the seemingly most ordinary of men. And though he is always cautious driving, maybe in the deepest parts of it, he is forever changed. I remember Uncle Ray's stories like they were painted onto the walls of my childhood. He was a trucker, a man etched with the lines of sun and road, and his voice, a gravelly rumble, held the weight of countless miles and even more countless tales. Every family gathering was punctuated by his anecdotes: wild encounters with eccentric hitchhikers, hair-raising near misses with rogue wildlife, and stories of bustling border towns that smelled of exotic spices and simmering intrigue. But there was one story, a singular narrative that held a different kind of weight, a chilling undercurrent that resonated even in my 6-year-old mind. It was the story of the Atacama Desert, a story that painted a picture of dread and whispered of things best left unseen. Uncle Ray never spoke of it lightly. It was always prefaced with a solemn tone, a hesitant sigh, and the unspoken warning to never, ever spend a night alone in the desert. It began, as most of his stories did, with a simple contract, a haul to Chile. The drive itself was unremarkable, he'd said, the landscape shifting from lush green to arid brown with the steady rhythm of the truck's engine. He painted a vivid picture of the journey, of the towering Andes Mountains, the vibrant sky filled with 1,000 shades of blue, the vast emptiness of the Atacama, a beauty that both thrilled and intimidated. I've since traveled that route myself, a grown man with a different perspective, and I can attest to the haunting desolation of the desert. The sheer scale of it, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the sparse vegetation, the sun beating down with merciless intensity. It's a landscape that can easily swallow you whole, leaving you feeling insignificant and exposed. Uncle Ray's words echoed in my mind as I navigated those winding roads, understanding how easy it would be to get lost, both physically and mentally, in such a place. He'd usually unwind after a long haul with a few drinks in a roadside bar, soaking in the atmosphere and the company of fellow truckers. But this time, a family reunion was on the horizon, and he craved a quick return. Instead of immersing himself in the local scene, he opted for the quickest route to his destination, sleep. He found a secluded spot, well off the main road and a few miles before the nearest village, and parked his rig. The Atacama Desert, under the blanket of a star-studded sky, seemed like the perfect place for a few hours of rest. And then, the singing started. He woke to it, a melodic tune that seemed to drift from nowhere and everywhere at once. He initially dismissed it as a faulty radio, but a quick glance at the dashboard revealed that it was off. Then, the singing ceased, replaced by a sound that curdled his blood, a cry, a scream, a desperate plea for help that echoed through the silent desert. He was jolted awake, a chill crawling up his spine. Confusion battled with a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to help. He fumbled with the truck's ignition, the engine roaring to life, the headlights cutting through the darkness. He leaned out of the window, his voice gruff as he shouted into the night, "Hello? Is anyone there? What's wrong?" But the answer was silence. An unnerving, heavy silence that seemed to press down on him. Just as he was about to step out of the truck, a movement caught the corner of his vision, a shadow writhing at the very edge of the headlight's reach. It was vaguely humanoid, resembling a woman's form, yet the face was a void, a pitch-black emptiness where features should have been. The sheer terror that flooded through him was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. He slammed the door, his foot pressing hard on the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He drove until the desert faded into the rearview mirror, until he was surrounded by familiar lights and sounds, until he found the first sign of civilization, a small town with a dusty diner and blinking neon lights. He didn't stop, he didn't rest, he didn't eat. He just kept driving, his mind racing, his heart hammering against his ribs. The drive back home was a blur, a relentless push against an invisible force that threatened to consume him. He arrived at the family gathering a wreck, drained, pale, and shaken to the core. He never spoke about the details of the incident, the way he usually did with his stories. He'd recount the singing, the scream, the shape at the edge of the light, with a trembling voice and a look of stark terror on his usually jovial face. His eyes would flicker with a haunted light, as if the desert itself had somehow wormed its way into his soul. It wasn't just a frightful experience, it was a profound change in Uncle Ray. He was always a man who embraced every moment, every adventure, but after that night, a shadow seemed to linger around him. The fear was palpable, a tangible ache beneath his usually boisterous demeanor. Even Grandma, A woman who'd seen more than her fair share of life's trials and tribulations, remarked on the shift in him. She commented on his sudden reticence, his tendency to retreat into himself, and how the once bright light in his eyes had been dimmed by a constant apprehension. His story became a family legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and shared with each new generation. Even years after he retired from trucking, long after his voice had lost some of its gruffness, his eyes would still flash with fear whenever the Atacama Desert was mentioned. His story wasn't just about a strange encounter, it was about the primal fear that lives deep within us, a fear of the unknown, of the vast and desolate places where the familiar boundaries of our reality blur. The Atacama, with its beauty and harshness, is a place where the fragility of human existence is starkly apparent. It is a place where the sky can feel impossibly vast and the silence deafening. It's a place where the mind, deprived of its usual anchors, can start to play tricks, where shadows can morph into something more sinister. Uncle Ray's story became a constant reminder for me of the power of the natural world, and the importance of respecting the boundaries that separate us from its wilder sides. It's a reminder that some things are best left undisturbed, some mysteries best left unsolved. As I write this, decades after Uncle Ray shared his story, I still feel a shiver run down my spine whenever I think about the singing, the scream, the shadow in the desert night. It's a story that has stayed with me, a potent lesson in respecting the wildness of the world, and the importance of never, ever spending a night alone in the desert. The vast expanse of the Atacama Desert continues to hold its secrets, a stark testament to the power of the unknown, a reminder that even in the brightest daylight, the shadows can hide things that are best left unseen. It's a reminder that the most terrifying things are often the ones that exist just beyond the edge of our understanding, the ones that whisper in the silence, the ones that sing a song of forgotten fears. And it's a reminder that sometimes, the most profound lessons are learned in the moments of greatest fear, in the face of the deepest darkness. I've always been a pragmatic person. Logic and reason were my guiding stars, my compass in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. I believed in facts, in evidence, in the tangible and the demonstrable. But that night, in the desolate expanse of Calumet City, Illinois, my carefully constructed worldview began to crumble. It was a night that would forever etch itself into the recesses of my memory, a night that solidified my belief that some things simply defy rational explanation. It was a delivery run, nothing out of the ordinary. I was hauling a load of construction materials, the kind of mundane cargo that filled my days and weeks. I was navigating the familiar route, the headlights of my day cab slicing through the darkness, when I hit a snag, the familiar clang of lowered crossing gates and the piercing wail of a train horn. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., the hour when the city seemed to exhale, a time of quietude broken only by the occasional distant murmur of traffic. Calumet City at that hour had a certain aura. Not exactly menacing, but certainly not comforting. It was a place where the remnants of industrial grandeur blended with the harsh realities of urban decay. The neighborhood I found myself in, a dead end just past the train tracks, felt particularly isolated. The air was thick with a sense of quiet desperation, a tangible feeling that lingered in the shadows and echoed in the stillness. It was one of those places where you felt a prickle of unease, a sense that you weren't entirely alone. I wasn't overly concerned, though. I'd been through worse, driving through countless desolate stretches across the country. I simply pulled over, parked, and settled in for the inevitable wait. The train rumbled by, a mechanical behemoth swallowing the night with its thunderous presence. It seemed to take forever, a protracted symphony of steel and steam. Finally, the train passed, the lights of the cab momentarily blinding in the darkness. The crossing gates rose slowly, creaking into their upward position. I shifted into gear, ready to continue my route, but then it happened. A series of sharp, insistent knocks echoed through the silent night, pounding against the metal of my truck door. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, a wave of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I quickly glanced at the rear view and side mirrors, peering through my windshield, scanning the deserted street. There was absolutely no one there. The road was wide enough that I would have seen someone dart away, would have noticed the slightest movement in the periphery. The area was utterly deserted, the only sounds the faint hum of my idling engine and the ever-present, lingering silence. The knocks came again, faster, more insistent, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was growing impatient. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sensation that had nothing to do with the cool night air. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to dismiss it as a trick of the wind, a phantom sound, but the primal instinct of self-preservation took over. I felt a surge of primal fear, a wave of unease washing over me. I was completely and utterly alone, a lone figure in a desolate landscape, and something was trying to get my attention. My hand instinctively went to the locking mechanism, double-checking that the doors were securely locked. I sat frozen, my eyes darting from window to window, mirror to mirror, in a frantic attempt to identify the source of the unsettling sound. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind an even more unnerving silence. My chest heaved, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, a stark realization of how insignificant I was in the face of the unknown. The rational part of my brain battled with the irrational, a constant internal conflict that left me utterly disoriented. I waited, holding my breath, listening intently for any further sign. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the unnerving silence of the night. After a few minutes, I cautiously started the engine, my hands trembling on the wheel. I was determined to get out of there as quickly as possible. As I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lingering in the shadows. I drove for a while in stunned silence, my mind replaying the events of the past few minutes. I tried to rationalize it, to find a plausible explanation. Maybe it was a prank, a group of kids looking for a bit of fun. But the desolate landscape, the utter lack of any human presence, didn't support that theory. The knocking had been too rapid, too insistent, too deliberate. My mind drifted to the history of the area. Calumet City, with its industrial past and its working-class roots, was certainly no stranger to darkness. I'd heard whispers of accidents, of tragedies, of lives cut short within the confines of those factories and those streets. I was certain that those tracks, that desolate stretch of road, had witnessed more than its share of human suffering. Maybe, just maybe, the echoes of those events lingered, a lingering presence that manifested in ways that defy understanding. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unexplainable had happened that night, something that transcended the boundaries of logic and reason. The events of that night challenged my deeply ingrained belief in the material world, in the tangible and the knowable. It was a jarring experience, a glimpse into the possibility of something beyond the realm of my comprehension. As the days turned into weeks, the vivid memory of that night began to fade, but the unsettling feeling lingered. I'd never been the same since that night. I became more attuned to the subtle energies around me, more mindful of the unseen forces that might be at play. I still believe in logic and reason, but I also recognize that there are aspects of reality that remain elusive, that exist beyond the confines of our limited understanding. That night in Calumet City taught me a valuable lesson. The world is a far more complex and mysterious place than we often realize. Sometimes, the most unsettling experiences are those that cannot be easily explained, those that refuse to conform to our preconceived notions of reality. And sometimes, the best course of action is to acknowledge the unknown, to accept the existence of the unexplainable, and to proceed with a healthy dose of humility and respect for the mysteries that surround us. The incident in Calumet City remains etched in my memory, a lingering whisper of the unknown. It's a reminder that while we strive to understand the world around us, there are realms of experience that lie beyond our grasp. And perhaps, that is as it should be. The mystery, the enigma, is what gives life its richness, its depth, its enduring fascination. And I, for one, will carry the memory of those insistent knocks, that chilling encounter with the unknown, as a constant reminder of the boundless wonders and the unsettling mysteries that continue to unfold in the heart of darkness. I've always been drawn to the quiet solitude of the mountains. There's a certain peace that settles over you when you're surrounded by towering trees and the crisp, clean air. It's a feeling that's hard to find in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So, when the opportunity arose to spend a few days exploring the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, I jumped at it. My trusty rig, a beat-up but beloved Ford F-250, was packed and ready for adventure, my goal a weekend of off-roading and camping in the heart of the wilderness. Walton's Mountain, a name familiar from the beloved television show of my childhood, beckoned me. I'd always imagined it as a place of idyllic beauty, a bastion of simple living and community, a far cry from the frenetic pace of the modern world. As I drove along the winding mountain roads, the landscape unfolded before me in breathtaking detail. Lush green forests stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted only by the occasional babbling brook or rocky outcrop. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I found a secluded spot near a small, secluded clearing, a perfect place to set up camp for the night. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a glorious blend of oranges, pinks, and purples. The temperature dropped noticeably as twilight settled in, and I stoked the campfire, eager to ward off the chill of the approaching night. The flames danced merrily, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, creating an atmosphere of both warmth and mystery. It was a perfect evening, one I'll never forget. As the fire died down to embers and the stars emerged in their full, glittering glory, I crawled into my sleeping bag in the back of my rig. The stillness of the night was profound, a blanket of quiet that enveloped me completely. I'd never felt so at peace with the world. Or so I thought. It wasn't the pitch-black darkness that eventually stirred me from my slumber. Oh no, the darkness was comforting, a warm, familiar embrace against the vastness of the universe. It was the sound that pricked my ears, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the mountain. It was a sound I couldn't quite place, not a creature's cry, nor the rustling of leaves, nor the distant howl of a wind in the treetops. It was something else entirely. At first I dismissed it as the playful rustling of nocturnal critters, the usual symphony of the wild. But the sound persisted, growing more insistent, more alien. It was a low, humming vibration, a subtle thrumming that seemed to permeate the air and vibrate through my very bones. It wasn't musical, not exactly, but it held a rhythmic quality, a strange, almost hypnotic cadence. It was a sound I had never heard before, and it sent a shiver of unease down my spine. I lay there, heart pounding in my chest, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Was it the wind whistling through a crevice in the mountainside? Some sort of geological phenomenon? A trick of my imagination, fueled by the solitude and the inky blackness of the night? But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was no longer a whisper, but a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. It was as if the mountain itself was breathing, exhaling a sound that was both ancient and unsettling. I couldn't see anything, the darkness outside my rig was absolute, but I could feel the vibrations, like a subtle tremor beneath my feet. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. Was I dreaming? Or was there something genuinely strange happening around me? Was I the only one hearing this? I looked out the window of my rig, hoping to see a glimmer of light, a sign of some rational explanation for the strange sounds. There was nothing but darkness, broken only by the distant, twinkling stars. The humming intensified, and I felt a surge of primal fear. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, a palpable force that seemed to emanate from the mountain. It felt as though the very air around me was thrumming with energy, a strange, otherworldly force. The hair on my arms stood on end, goosebumps erupted on my skin as the sound pressed against my eardrums. I wanted to get out of the truck to run away, but I was paralyzed by fear. What was making that sound? What was out there in the darkness? The humming began to change, the tone rising and falling, swaying like a hypnotic melody. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. My vocal cords felt as if they had been tied with rope. It went on, a strange, endless song of the mountain, a sound that seemed to pierce through my very soul. I huddled deeper into my sleeping bag, trying to block out the sound, to shut it out of my mind. But it was useless. The humming was everywhere, surrounding me, penetrating me. It was like being inside a giant organ pipe, the vastness of the mountain resonating with an otherworldly song. Eventually, as the sky started to lighten, the sound slowly began to fade. It ebbed and flowed, like the retreating tide, until it finally disappeared altogether, leaving behind a silence so profound it was almost deafening. I lay there, trembling, for a long time, my mind reeling from the experience. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. The memory of the humming was burned into my brain, a haunting reminder of the night I spent on Walton's Mountain. I spent the rest of the morning packing up my rig, my movements hesitant, my eyes darting around, constantly searching for something, anything, that might explain the sounds I'd heard. But there was nothing. The mountain looked as serene and peaceful as ever, bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. I drove away from Walton's Mountain as quickly as I could, leaving behind the lingering unease that had taken root within me. I never went back. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe it was a rare natural phenomenon, some underground activity I was uniquely positioned to hear. Maybe it was a collective hallucination, something sparked by the solitude and the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. But no matter how hard I try, I can't quite shake the feeling that something truly extraordinary happened on that mountain that night. The memory of the humming sound, that strange, otherworldly melody, still creeps me out to this day. It's a reminder that there are things in this world that we don't understand, things that lie hidden beneath the surface, things that can stir a primal fear deep within our souls. And sometimes, the best course of action is to leave those things undisturbed, to respect the mysteries that nature holds so close to its heart. Walton's Mountain, once a symbol of idyllic simplicity in my mind, now holds a different meaning for me. It's a place of beauty and mystery, a place where the boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary blur, a place where I heard a sound that will forever haunt my memories, a place I will never forget.